Hi everybody, my name is Dora Marinova and I'm a professor of sustainability at Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute. Curtin University is located in Perth, Western Australia. Okay, now that we're in presenter mode, I hope you can see this presentation. So, hello from Perth, Western Australia, where I acknowledge the Noongar Whadjuk people who are the original custodians of the land on which I stand today. Curtin University recognizes the impacts of colonialization on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and is committed to moving forward together in a spirit of mutual honor and respect. The grass trees that you see on this photo demark the territory of the Noongar people. The Aboriginal people in Australia have looked after this continent and its vegetation and its animals for 60,000 years. The presence of European culture has been for 400 years and British culture in the last 200 years. So we have a lot to learn and a lot to respect in the way this continent has been managed by Aboriginal people. What are we talking today is about livestock and its impacts on the environment and on sustainability. In the old days, livestock used to be used for labor, for pulling carts, for ploughing, but these days livestock is mainly as a source of food to feed the increasing hungry global population of the world. What has happened with the global population has been enormous increase, particularly after the Second World War. We've seen this big acceleration with population numbers going very, very fast. At the same time, through livestock, we've seen a stable increase in the supply of meat on a per capita basis on the graph on the left. And this supply of meat, the pace has exceeded the pace of population growth, as you can see on the graph on the right. So we have been feeding the population, the increasing global population, with meat products at a faster rate than the increase of the population itself. We see similar trends in relation to egg consumption. Again, after the Second World War, there is a big increase of supply on per capita of eggs. With milk, we have not seen such a pronounced shift, mainly because of the Chinese population still continuing to consume plant-based milks, in particular soya milk, and only more recently we have seen an increase in the per capita milk consumption. So, by providing the food through livestock-based products, what has also happened is we have started to use an increasing amount of land mass on this planet for livestock, for meat and dairy production, for grazing, and also to produce the crops that are being fed to the animals so that then we can consume the animal-based products. Out of the old land mass of the planet, 27%, the section in the red, is used for livestock, while crops directly for human consumption occupy only 7% of the land mass of the planet. This is the yellow section on the left of the graph. Compared to the forest that we have left, only 26%. But the other thing that is really important to acknowledge is that despite the enormous increase in population numbers, the built-up areas, including cities, towns, villages, and infrastructure, occupy only 1% of the landmass of the planet. As a consequence, what happens outside the settlement often becomes invisible, or we, the city dwellers in particular, forget about the enormous amounts of land that is constantly being cleared and used for livestock production. So the built-up areas occupy only 1% compared again to 27% of the landmass used for livestock. With expanding supply of animal-based products, obviously this trend of using the landmass of the planet cannot continue endlessly, because we need the shrubs, we need the forest, we need all the opportunities for wild animals and for to maintain the ecological health of the planet. So, with population explosion is a relatively recent phenomenon, and it is associated with the Anthropocene, which started around 1750 with the commencement of industrialization. The Anthropocene defines a particular geological time in the history of our planet where human-influenced activities have triggered atmospheric, geological, hydrologic, biospheric, and other changes in the Earth systems that are being altered by human activities and would have not happened without the presence of human population. The Anthropocene follows the Holocene, which lasted for 11,000 years, and that was a period after the Ice Age with small temperature variations, which was very comfortable for human life to develop. And however, with the Anthropocene, what we have witnessed is a tension between the ecological processes on the planet and the economic development and the impact of economic activities. So sustainability emerged as a very powerful concept in the late 1980s, to resolve the tension between environmental protection and economic activities. So, in the basis of sustainability is the concept that we need to provide opportunities for future generations to have the same access to natural resources as we have nowadays. However, in its essence, sustainability is also an anthropocentric concept. It looks after the well-being and the prospects of only one species, which is the human species, and the well-being of all other species, including livestock and wildlife, is subjugated to the well-being and the needs of the human population. So this anthropocentric concept, although it is trying to resolve a lot of the tension, is also not enough if we are to preserve the health of this planet. The biggest impact that probably everybody knows about is climate change, generated through the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, that have triggered temperature increases, making life on Earth less comfortable. The graph shows you the way the temperatures have shifted from what used to be normal in the 1950s, 1960s, and the temperatures keep shifting to the right, which means that the weather, the climate is getting hotter and hotter, and we are experiencing less comfortable conditions on the planet. So that's one of the characteristics of Anthropocene. And that's triggered because of development in the energy sector, in the transport. It's also triggered because of the big production of animal-based foods and the industrialization of the food and the food systems. The three greenhouse gases that I referred to, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, are very different in terms of their impact on the global climate. The methane and nitrous oxide, which are very directly related to agriculture and livestock, are much more powerful greenhouse gases compared to carbon dioxide. Most estimates, when we are trying to compare the different greenhouse gas emissions, use a 100-year period of cumulative forcing or temperature changes, which spreads the impact, particularly of methane, over 100 years instead of 20 years when the gas is the most powerful, and then it breaks down. The little graph underneath shows the lifespan of methane in the red. So most of our estimates reduce the power of methane, which means that by doing this, we underestimate the impact of agriculture and livestock in particular on climate change. If we are to use the global warming potential over 20 years, which is the pie chart on the right, we will see that agriculture, the green section of the pie chart, is responsible for 22% and is the sector that has the biggest global warming potential, with livestock estimated to contribute around 18%. And that's higher than the electricity and heat production. It's higher than other energy, higher than transport. And overall, agriculture has a bigger impact than all the other industries. So, what I'm trying to convey here is that irrespective of the changes that we do in all the other human activities, all the other sectors of the economy, if we do not address the question of livestock and its contribution to climate change, we are destined to experience irreversible changes and uncomfortable conditions on this planet. Livestock, as I mentioned, is mainly to provide food security. Ironically, livestock is also more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change than plants, through droughts, floods, fires, also through pathogens and new viruses, and the fact that this increasing number of livestock that we have on the planet, estimated around 75 billion, they increasingly live in very crowded conditions where we're using antibiotics, and this kind of conditions are very easy to spread new viruses, and the sanitary conditions are actually quite bad. On the other hand, we selectively are breeding chickens with larger breasts or cows that produce more milk, which means that the animals quite often cannot cope with the weight of their bodies, and they are also prone to the development of a number of diseases. A recent assessment of the impact of coronavirus, COVID-19, and climate change on the Australian economy by Deloitte identified that agriculture is the hardest hit industry by COVID-19, climate change, and also agriculture is the industry that requires the biggest change. I'm very much helped in this presentation by the two papers in the opening session of this conference by Clive Phillips and Donald Broom, because they laid some of the important considerations that we need to take when we are talking about food security and when we are talking about livestock. So livestock's environmental impacts go beyond climate change and land use, although these impacts are also interlinked and are interdependent, but we have seen clearing of large amounts of native vegetation accompanied with biodiversity loss. We are seeing use of fresh water and other water resources, soil degradation, pollution, the use of pesticides, fertilizers in the waterways, and increased use of antibiotics. So let's look at how Livestock has impacted clearing of native vegetation, particularly in Australia. The two states that have been the most impacted by land clearing are Queensland and Western Australia. However, there is much more information and data about Queensland, and this is why I'm going to refer to the state of Queensland. Every day, there are about 1,500 football fields with native vegetation that are being cleared for livestock. Since 1997, 90% of all vegetation clearing has been for pasture land, and in 2018, this percentage was as high as 93%. The catchment around the Great Barrier Reef has experienced significant land clearing, and 93% of this land clearing is attributed to beef production in particular. Compared to crops directly for human use and consumption, and 8%, and clearing for mining activities and settlements and growth of forests is only 2%. It is estimated that by 2030, in 10 years' time, we'll see 3 million hectares of untouched forest to be bulldozed in Eastern Australia because of the livestock grazing. This means that a number of the Australian threatened plants and animals are 75% of the 1,640 plants and animals listed as threatened are exposed to habitat loss, and this is one of their main threats. What is even more alarming is that a lot of this land clearing occurs without assessment by the Australian government, federal government in particular, despite the fact that Australia has adopted the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. In fact, the iconic koala is now functionally extinct because of habitat loss, and the populations of koalas that we can still find are the ones that are in protected areas in wildlife parks, but they're not in the wild. Similarly, the Great Barrier Reef has the condition has changed from poor to very poor because of bleaching and the impacts of climate change, but also because of land-based runoff, which are both consequences and related to deforestation. So land clearing has had a huge impact on native vegetation. We know that Australia is also the driest continent on Earth. Despite that, we are using the precious water resources to feed and to grow livestock, when we know that 1 kilogram of beef, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industry Research Organization of Australia estimates that 1 kilogram of beef requires 50,000 litres of water to produce, while the Environmental Protection Agency of Victoria estimates that 1 kilogram of beef requires 100,000 litres. This compares very poorly to the freshwater demand of potatoes, 500 litres, even rice, 1,550 litres. Chicken similarly requires 3,500 litres, very, very high. And at the same time, Australia is experiencing increasing amounts of rainfall. In fact, 2018-2019 was the lowest in almost 50 years of rainfall of 351 millimeters during the year, according to the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. The situation with cow's milk is similar. A litre of cow's milk requires more than 600 litres of water to produce. Despite that, we continue to consume cow-based dairy, including milk and cheeses. In fact, 70% of all the water used in Australia has been used by the agricultural sector. The huge amount of livestock also results in overgrazing and significant soil degradation through the production of feed to feed the animals so that we can then consume the animal-based products. Globally, between 1 and 6 billion hectares of soil is degraded due to human activities, mainly agriculture, which means that we are losing the topsoil, we are seeing compaction, erosion, poor drainage, acidity, nutrient deficiency, salinity, encroachment of invasive species, and we can no longer rely on the land to be as fertile as it used to be. For Western Australia, where I am at the moment, it is estimated that 1 million hectares of agricultural land is severely affected by salinity, and a further 3 to 4.5 million hectares are under threat to be impacted by salinity. And almost all streams and rivers in Western Australia, in the southwest corner of Western Australia, are experiencing different degrees of salinity. We need to remember that this degraded land once used to be forests, including in the southwest of Western Australia, old-growth forests. And in other parts of the world, there have been forests and savannas. So we're using this fertile land to dedicate to livestock. What I have done so far is talking about some of the problems associated with the Anthropocene. And the picture is very bleak, is very overwhelming, very pessimistic. So how can we reshape, how can we heal the relationship that one species, humans, have with the earth, with the planet where we live? The philosopher Glenn Albrecht coined the term symbiocene, which is the period in Earth's history where humans need to symbiotically reintegrate themselves psychologically and technologically through the human activities into nature and nature's systems. The symbiocene and this kind of thinking is a way to move past the anthropocentric concepts and abolish speciesism, where on the well-being of only one species is the focus, and embrace all animals and their intrinsic rights to exist on this planet. With symbiocene come concepts such as planetary health or One Health, where the health of people and the health of the planet are interrelated. We can no longer think of human health as in silo and separate from the health of the natural environment, because everything is connected. What we do to the world comes back to affect us, and quite often in ways that we would not expect, or ways that are very negative for us. But on the other side, anything that improves the health of the planet also has direct benefits for people. The photo shows the heat wave in Adelaide last year in December, when the koalas came to the cyclists asking for water. And the cyclists were keen and kind to help the animals, endorsing the fact that they're suffering similarly from heat and heat exhaustion as we are as human beings. So I'm very much responsible, as I've done until now, to send very threatening, very disempowering and overwhelming messages about the impacts of climate change and the impacts of Anthropocene on our planet. We live on a damaged planet. Yes, this is true. And most discussions about climate change are framed negatively. The polar bears are losing their habitats. The Great Barrier Reef is being bleached because of climate change. These are all scientific facts. But this evidence is quite disempowering, and it's very important from a psychological point of view and communication point of view that we actually emphasize not on the losses, but emphasize the gains and the benefits. And the Symbiocene as a concept, it sends a positive message that we need to reconfigure our relationship with the natural world. We need to maintain hope and the desire to do something for sustainability, to do something for planetary health. This requires human motivation and creativity. And I want to share with you some experience that we had with high school students in Sydney, in Australia, in using an ASMR video in communicating changes that they can do related to climate change, including changes in their diets. If you don't know the meaning of ASMR, that means that you are probably part of my generation, as the majority of young people are quite familiar with autonomous sensory meridian response videos and podcasts, which create feeling of relaxation, feeling some kind of a deep relaxation and positive experience. So what we did last year, we created an ASMR video to talk about climate change, and we used 20 high school students from Sydney and a 16-year-old girl who communicated positive messages about climate change. So she used soft voice, relaxing sounds, and despite the fact that she was talking about something that is so overwhelming, and this students were also striking and demonstrating for climate change against the inaction of the Australian government, we actually managed to produce quite a positive impact. Some of the quotes from the interviews that we conducted with them after listening to the ASMR video are talking that they felt guilty, but at the same time they started thinking about what they can do. So the ASMR video created awareness. The girl made them think. The next day they considered what is the way to get to school, what is the food that they want to eat. So it was a strange feeling, but a positive, totally positive way of thinking about climate change. And our conclusion was that if we are to talk to younger people, we need to emphasize the positive messages, because everything that we do to heal the planet also contributes positively to human health. Australia is one of the few countries that still has places of wilderness with a very light or without a human footprint. And David Attenborough, in his recent documentary, talks about the need to rewild the planet and also the need to not encroach further on places of wilderness that still exist. And the photos here show you a few places from Western Australia that range from Ningaloo Reef to the Wanjama Gorge, where the bats are still living in their natural habitat, and Mount Hart in the middle. So if we are to preserve the wilderness, that means that we need to restrict further expansion of wild stock and the activities of the wild stock industry. So the options for this to happen is for either people to change their diets or the livestock industry to change its practices. And as I've already mentioned, this has multiple co-benefits in relation to the environment, in relation to human health, and overall it will be better for the livestock animals themselves as well as for any other species and wild animals on the planet. The way I see the changes, I think that both will happen simultaneously. We will witness the livestock industry changing its practices and using research and development, but at the same time, we are seeing people and young people in particular changing their dietary preferences. The livestock industry, the dairy industry in Australia, is committed to eliminating further deforestation by this year. I'm not sure where this has happened. Similarly, McDonald's is committed as a global company to stop deforestation for its products. Meat and Livestock Australia wants to become carbon neutral by 2030, and they're looking at using different additives such as seaweed, oil supplements, legumes, and native plants to reduce methane emissions from the livestock. They're looking at manure management and breeding of species or breeds that reduce methane emissions. As well as different biological controls to target methane-producing microbes inside and outside the livestock animals. Organic farming, its aim is to preserve the fertility of the soil. Regenerative agriculture, similarly, agroforestry, all these three, organic farming, regenerative agriculture, and agroforestry, are good, excellent initiatives. The only problem is that we cannot sustain the current large numbers of livestock through these alternative farming techniques. Therefore, we are seeing cultured meat or lab-grown meat and use of insects as a possible solution. The problem is that all this need to happen simultaneously as they need to happen very quickly, particularly given the window of opportunity that we have in relation to climate change. And probably it is much easier to see changes in human diets and a transition towards sustainable diets that have low environmental impact and contribute to nutrition. They're healthy and nutritious, but at the same time respect the biodiversity and the ecosystems. And it's interesting that only a few countries include environmental concerns in their dietary guidelines, despite the fact that a transition to more plant-based options can produce huge savings in projected greenhouse gas emissions. This particular study by Springman et al. In 2016 is estimating that the projected 51% increase in food-associated greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced to only 7% if we adopt the dietary guidelines at the World Health Organization that limit red meat intake in particular to no more than 500 grams per week. The Eat Lancet Commission produced dietary guidelines last year, where their recommendation in relation to red meat is much lower. According to the Australian guidelines, which is in line with the World Health Organization's guidelines, it should be 75 grams per day, but the Eat Lancet Commission recommends 30 to 40 grams per day. Why do we need that? Because there are boundaries. Now, we need to combine the health boundaries together with the planetary boundaries so that we can feed the expected 10 billion global population by 2050 on a healthier diet. Currently, the North American diet, which is very similar to the Australian diet, drastically exceeds the health boundaries and the combination between planetary and health boundaries. In the case of red meat, we are seeing 6 times higher consumption of red meat. Similar with eggs and poultry and dairy. We are also eating too much starchy vegetables, and we are not eating enough nuts, whole grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables that can provide the necessary amino acids, the necessary proteins, and other important nutrients in a better way that is healthier and at the same time is preserving the natural environment. I mentioned several times that that human health can improve and human deaths can be avoided if we focus on reduction in red meat consumption, if we focus on reducing the amount of calories that are being consumed, and improved intake of fruit and vegetables. So, by applying such dietary guidelines, we can see millions of human lives saved, but at the same time, we can also see lives saved with livestock animals and wild animals. In fact, we won't need to artificially produce as many livestock as we do at the moment. So the Eat-Lancet Commission described food to be the defining issue of this century. And the transformation to healthy diets by 2050 will require substantial dietary shifts where fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes have to double in consumption. We need to halve the food losses because they're quite significant. And we also need to reduce the intake of red meat and sugars. And red meat in particular needs to be reduced by more than 50%. And without action on human diets, irrespective as to how much the livestock industry is changing, we will not be able to shift to the Symbiocene, and we will risk failing the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. So the strategies require national and international commitment for such dietary shifts towards more plant-based options. And another shift that is really important is to stop converting wild forests into agricultural land. So we need to be able to achieve this within the existing agricultural land. And we also need to be careful not to overexploit the ocean. So the emphasis has to be not on increasingly producing high quantities of food, more animal-based products, but we need to shift towards the production of healthy foods. So we need to intensify food production of healthy foods. So how far are we from the Symbiocene? There is quite a lot of work to be done. The Symbiocene is also sending us the message that we need to develop a strong connection with nature. We need to re-embed ourselves in nature. We need to heal the existing connection, the current connection between humans and nature, because we are just one species. That means that we need to reconsider the relationships that we have with the animal world, including livestock. And we need to change both the food systems and at the same time make drastic dietary shifts to move into the Symbiocene. Such changes require higher ethical and spiritual values, and most importantly, respect for the planet, and feel responsible for all the creatures, all the species that inhabit this planet. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to any feedback. You can use my email address to contact me. Thanks a lot.